Ever wonder what drives someone to risk it all? Can the thrill of danger really be worth the ultimate price? Number 9. Karl Wallenda. Did you know that some families pass down daredevil stunts like others pass down recipes? The Wallenda family name has been synonymous with death-defying high-wire acts for generations, but their patriarch's final performance remains frozen in time. Karl Wallenda wasn't just any tightrope walker, he was the tightrope walker. Born in 1905 to a circus family, Karl formed the famous Flying Wallendas, known worldwide for performing dangerous stunts without safety nets. Their signature act, the 7-person chair pyramid, took nerve and precision that few performers could match. By 1978, Karl was 73 years old, an age when most people are enjoying retirement from comfortable armchairs, but not Karl. Despite his advanced age, he agreed to walk between 2 towers of the 10-story Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The wire stretched 121 feet high above concrete and asphalt. On March 22nd, as cameras rolled and spectators watched with bated breath, Karl began his walk. Suddenly, strong winds picked up. His balance pole dipped. For several heart-stopping moments, he fought to regain control. Then, in a moment captured on film and seared into circus history, Karl Wallenda fell to his death. The footage of his fall became infamous, a stark reminder of gravity's unforgiving nature. What many don't know is that Karl had mentioned concerns about the rigging of the wire before the stunt. Some reports suggest improper setup of the guide wires contributed to the tragedy. Karl's legacy didn't die with him. His great-grandson Nick Wallenda has continued the family tradition, crossing Niagara Falls and the Grand Canyon on high wires, but unlike his great-grandfather, using safety harnesses for these televised events. When asked why he continues despite Karl's fate, Nick often quotes his great-grandfather, "Life is on the wire, everything else is just waiting." Number 8. Sailendra Nath Roy. Have you ever been so determined to break a record that you'd risk your life? For Sailendra Nath Roy, his own hair became both his claim to fame and the tragic instrument of his demise. Roy wasn't a professional stuntman or circus performer. He was a police officer from West Bengal, India, who discovered an unusual talent, the ability to pull heavy objects using only his ponytail. This wasn't just a party trick. Roy set Guinness World Records by pulling a train and a light aircraft with his hair. His most famous stunts involved zip-lining across rivers using only his hair attached to a pulley. He successfully completed multiple crossings, including one over the River Teesta in 2011 that earned him a world record for the farthest distance traveled on a zip line using hair. On April 28, 2013, hundreds gathered at the Coronation Bridge over the Teesta River to watch Roy attempt his most daring feat yet. The 50-year-old planned to slide 600 feet across the river on a zip line attached solely by his hair. Roy had told friends this would be his final hair-hanging stunt. He was tragically correct. Partway across the wire, Roy's hair became stuck in the wheeled pulley. Unable to move forward or backward, he dangled 70 feet above the river. Spectators watched in horror as he struggled desperately, waving his arms for help. After about 25 minutes of struggling, Roy went motionless. No emergency personnel were standing by. No safety harness supported him. There was no quick way to reach him. By the time he was brought down and rushed to the hospital, doctors declared him dead from a massive heart attack. The most heartbreaking detail: Roy's wife had begged him to stop performing these dangerous stunts. He had promised her this would be his last one, a promise kept in the most tragic way possible. Authorities later revealed that Roy hadn't obtained proper permission for the stunt. There were no safety measures in place, no medical team standing by, and no rescue plan. His determination to entertain and amaze became a sobering reminder of how thin the line can be between spectacular achievement and disaster. Number 7. Jane Wicker. What's more daring than walking on an airplane wing? How about hanging upside down from one with no safety gear while the plane loops through the sky? Jane Wicker made wing walking look easy. A seasoned performer and skilled aerial daredevil, she captivated airshow audiences across America with her graceful, seemingly effortless routines atop moving aircraft. But what set Wicker apart wasn't just her courage, it was her choreography. Unlike many wing walkers who simply stand or move across the wings, Wicker created beautiful, elaborate poses, including her signature move, hanging underneath the wing by her ankles as the plane flew inverted, turning her into a human chandelier. Wicker's path to becoming a wing walker wasn't traditional. She started her professional life as a budget analyst for the FAA, ironic considering her later career, literally pushing the boundaries of aviation safety. After seeing wing walkers at an airshow in the 1980s, she was instantly smitten with the art form. She trained relentlessly to master the physically demanding skills required and eventually became one of the most recognized wing walkers in the industry. What made Wicker's performances particularly breathtaking was her refusal to use safety lines or parachutes during her routines. When asked about this choice, she often explained that safety equipment would limit her movement and prevent her most beautiful poses. Plus, she argued at the low altitudes they performed, a parachute wouldn't have time to deploy anyway. On June 22, 2013, Wicker was performing at the Vectron Dayton Airshow in Ohio. Thousands of spectators watched as she climbed out onto the wing of her 450 HP Stearman biplane, piloted by Charlie Schwenker. The weather was good and the performance was going as planned. Wicker had just settled into a seated position on the bottom of the inverted wing, a move she had performed countless times. Suddenly, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft seemed to lose altitude and bank sharply. Before either Wicker or Schwenker could correct the situation, the airplane plummeted to the ground and burst into flames upon impact. Both performers died instantly. Investigations later suggested that the plane had stalled while flying too slowly during a complex maneuver. What makes Wicker's story particularly poignant was her love for what she did. In an interview conducted just before her fatal performance, she told a reporter, "I feel like the most fortunate person in the world. I get to do what I love." She had even recently become engaged, planning to marry her fiancé on the wing of her plane. In a chilling coincidence, Wicker had once said, "I'm never nervous or scared because I know if I die doing this, I'll die a happy woman. It's the way I want to go." Her words proved tragically prophetic. Number 6. Alex Harville. Can a motorcycle really fly? For Alex Harville, pushing the boundaries of what was possible on two wheels wasn't just a passion, it was a way of life. Harville wasn't a traditional showman or circus performer. He was a professional motocross racer who found his true calling in distance jumping. Growing up in Washington state, he spent his childhood riding dirt bikes across the rolling hills and farmland, developing the skills that would eventually make him famous. By his mid-20s, Harville had already set 2 world records. In 2013, he soared 297 feet in a dirt-to-dirt motorcycle jump. Later, he broke the ramp-to-dirt record with a jaw-dropping 351-foot leap. These weren't stunts performed by a daredevil with a death wish. They were calculated risks taken by a skilled athlete who meticulously planned each attempt. On June 17, 2021, the 28-year-old father of 2 arrived at the Moses Lake Airshow in Washington. His goal that day was monumental, to break Robbie Madison's 2008 world record by jumping his Suzuki 351 feet over the length of a football field. The attempt was meant to be the grand opening of the airshow. During a practice jump before the main event, something went catastrophically wrong. Harville's motorcycle came up short on the landing ramp, sending him flying over the handlebars. He hit the ramp with tremendous force in what witnesses described as a violent crash. Despite immediate medical attention, Harville died from his injuries at the hospital. What makes Harville's story particularly heartbreaking was the timing. Just 1 month earlier, he and his wife had welcomed their second son. In interviews before the attempt, Harville spoke not of fear but of detailed preparation. He described calculating speeds, ramp angles, and the countless factors that go into a successful jump. "You can't go halfway with anything like this," he once said in an interview. After his death, fellow motorcycle jumper Robbie Madison, whose record Harville had been trying to break, paid tribute. Shattered about the news of Alex Harville, he had flown his motorcycle further than most ever will and lived a life full of passion and love. The saddest irony? The jump wasn't even the main record Harville had been training for. This attempt was a warm-up for an even more ambitious jump he had planned for later that year. His passion for pushing limits, for flying through the air on two wheels, was both what defined his life and what ultimately ended it. Number 5. Owen Hart. Can entertainment wrestling go too far? For fans of professional wrestling, the line between scripted entertainment and real danger became tragically clear on a May night in Kansas City. Owen Hart wasn't supposed to die at the Over the Edge pay-per-view event in 1999. As the Blue Blazer, a superhero parody character, Hart was known for his incredible technical wrestling ability and high-flying moves. The youngest of the famous Hart wrestling family, Owen had established himself as one of the most talented performers in the World Wrestling Federation, now WWE. That fateful night, Hart was supposed to make a spectacular entrance, descending from the rafters of the Kemper Arena on a cable. It was meant to be comical, a superhero making a clumsy entrance. He had performed similar stunts before, but this time, a quick-release harness was being used instead of the locking carabiner from previous performances. As over 16,000 fans waited for his match, something went horrifically wrong. The quick-release mechanism triggered early, whether accidentally or due to malfunction has been debated, and Hart fell 78 feet, hitting the top rope of the wrestling ring before bouncing into the ring. The impact was catastrophic. What makes this tragedy particularly disturbing is that the accident wasn't shown on television. The broadcast was showing a pre-recorded interview when Hart fell. However, the audience in the arena witnessed the entire horrific scene. Even more controversially, after paramedics worked desperately to save Hart, the WWF made the decision to continue the event. Hart was pronounced dead at the hospital from internal bleeding caused by blunt force trauma. He was just 34 years old, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. His death sent shockwaves through the wrestling world and raised serious questions about safety protocols in entertainment wrestling. The aftermath was equally disturbing. Hart's widow, Martha, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the WWF, claiming the harness system was unnecessarily dangerous and that proper safety measures weren't in place. The case was eventually settled out of court for $18 million. Perhaps most heartbreaking were the reports that Hart had expressed discomfort with performing the stunt. According to some accounts, he had previously voiced concerns about the safety of the harness system. Fellow wrestlers later revealed that Hart, despite his high-flying wrestling style, actually feared heights, making his final stunt all the more poignant. The tragedy fundamentally changed how the wrestling industry approached stunts and safety. While professional wrestling has always balanced entertainment with controlled risk, Owen Hart's death remains a stark reminder of how quickly entertainment can turn tragic when safety is compromised for spectacle. Number 4. Charles Blondin. How far would you go to be remembered? For some, the desire for immortality drives them to the thinnest of margins between glory and disaster. Before Karl Wallenda, there was Charles Blondin, the original highway superstar whose death ironically didn't come from a fall, but whose life-threatening stunts captivated the 19th century world. Born Jean-François Gravelet in 1824 France, Blondin began training on the tightrope at age 5. By his 20s, he had gained fame throughout Europe for his incredible balance and showmanship. But it was his 1859 crossing of Niagara Falls that transformed him from a circus performer into an international celebrity. Blondin didn't just walk across the 1,100-foot-long, 3.25-inch-wide rope suspended 160 feet above the raging waters. He turned it into theater. During subsequent crossings that summer, he performed increasingly outrageous stunts, crossing blindfolded, carrying his manager on his back, stopping midway to cook an omelet, and even pushing a wheelbarrow across. Each new feat drew larger crowds. Estimates suggest 100,000 people came to witness his Niagara crossings, including the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII. Newspapers worldwide reported his exploits, making him perhaps the first international Daredevil celebrity. What's particularly fascinating about Blondin was his longevity. Unlike many who followed in his footsteps, he continued performing dangerous high-wire acts well into his 60s. His final performance came at the age of 73. The irony of Blondin's story is that despite thousands of death-defying crossings without safety nets, he died peacefully in his bed in 1897 at age 72 from diabetes complications. Yet his career was filled with near disasters that could have ended very differently. During one performance in London, his rope partially failed. Rather than plummeting to his death, Blondin managed to cling to the remaining strands until he could be rescued. On another occasion, a guy wire snapped, causing his rope to sway violently, yet he maintained his balance. Perhaps most telling about Blondin's character was his response to those who called him reckless. "To me, walking a tightrope is as easy as walking on solid ground," he once said. But he also acknowledged, "I practice the most unremitting diligence." Indeed, despite his theatrical flair, Blondin was meticulous about checking every inch of his equipment before each performance. His legacy inspired generations of wirewalkers who followed, some to glory, others to tragedy. But unlike many on this list, Blondin managed to push the boundaries of human capability while ultimately dying of natural causes after a long career. Perhaps his most impressive feat wasn't crossing Niagara Falls, but navigating the perilous balance between spectacular risk and calculated safety throughout his long career. Number 3. Pyotr Dolgov. Would you jump from the edge of space for your country? During the height of the Cold War, the competition between the United States and Soviet Union extended beyond nuclear weapons and the race to the moon. It reached literally to the edge of space itself. Colonel Pyotr Dolgov wasn't a circus performer or professional daredevil. He was a Soviet Air Force officer and experienced test parachutist who volunteered for one of the most dangerous missions of the space race era, testing high-altitude parachute systems that could potentially save the lives of cosmonauts. On November 1, 1962, Dolgov ascended to the stratosphere in a pressurized gondola attached to a high-altitude balloon as part of a secret Soviet project called Zveno. The mission aimed to test both the balloon system and new pressure suits designed for high-altitude bailouts. When the balloon reached approximately 93,970 feet, 28.64 kilometers, near the edge of space where the air is so thin it can't support human life and where temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Celsius, Dolgov prepared to jump. At this altitude, human blood would boil without a pressurized suit, and the lack of oxygen would cause unconsciousness in seconds. Dolgov stepped out of the gondola and into the near vacuum of the upper stratosphere. It should have been a triumph of Soviet technology and human courage. Instead, disaster struck immediately. As he exited the gondola, his pressure suit struck the edge of the door, creating a small tear barely visible but catastrophically fatal at that altitude. His suit rapidly depressurized. The official Soviet story for decades was that Dolgov died from oxygen starvation during descent. The truth, finally revealed years later, was far more horrific. The explosive decompression at that altitude caused immediate unconsciousness and fatal internal trauma. He was likely dead before he began his long fall back to Earth. The tragedy had an almost surreal political dimension. Because the mission was classified, Dolgov's death was kept secret from the world. The Soviet government released misleading information, claiming the jump had been successful and that Dolgov had died later in an unrelated accident. It wasn't until after the fall of the Soviet Union that the true circumstances of his death became public knowledge. What makes Dolgov's story particularly poignant is that while his American counterpart in high-altitude jumps, Joseph Kittinger, who had completed a similar jump 2 years earlier, became a celebrated figure in the West, Dolgov's sacrifice remained largely unknown and unacknowledged for decades. The saddest irony. The data collected from Dolgov's fatal jump likely contributed to improvements in pressure suit technology that would later save the lives of numerous cosmonauts and astronauts. His death, classified and hidden away in Soviet archives, still served its purpose in advancing human spaceflight safety. Dolgov was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Star, but the true nature of his heroism, voluntarily stepping into the near vacuum of space to test life-saving equipment, wasn't fully acknowledged until long after both he and the Soviet Union had passed into history. Number 2. Angelo Scarpellini. How do you top a lifetime of death-defying stunts? For some daredevils, the need to create ever more dangerous performances leads to an inevitable conclusion. Angelo Scarpellini wasn't just any circus performer, he was considered one of Italy's greatest human cannonballs. For nearly 3 decades, Scarpellini had been shot from cannons hundreds of times, flying through the air to the amazement of audiences across Europe. The human cannonball act is one of circus performing's most dangerous traditions. Despite appearing to be blasted by explosive powder, the performers are actually propelled by compressed air or springs. This doesn't make the stunt any less dangerous. They still fly through the air at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour with no ability to adjust their trajectory once launched. By 1972, Scarpellini was 45 years old and a veteran of circus life. He had perfected his act over thousands of performances with the Circus Americano, carefully calculating the precise amount of force needed, the angle of trajectory, and the positioning of the landing net. Each variable had to be perfect. Too much power could send him flying past the safety net. Too little could mean falling short and crashing to the ground. On September 11, 1972, during a performance in Vienna, Austria, Scarpellini climbed into his cannon as he had done countless times before. The drum roll intensified, the audience held their breath, and with a theatrical boom, he was propelled into the air. Something went terribly wrong. Whether it was a miscalculation, a mechanical failure, or an unexpected gust of wind, Scarpellini missed the safety net entirely. He crashed to the ground in front of horrified spectators, including many children. Despite immediate medical attention, he died from his injuries. What makes Scarpellini's story particularly poignant is how it highlights the precarious nature of circus safety in that era. Unlike modern performances with extensive safety protocols, circus acts of the 1970s often relied primarily on the performer's experience and intuition. When those failed, there was rarely a backup system. Even more tragic is that Scarpellini reportedly had considered retirement. After thousands of successful launches, the law of probability was working against him. Yet, like many career daredevils, the applause and adrenaline kept him returning to the cannon. His death came during a period when traditional circuses were already facing growing competition from television and other entertainment forms. For many who witnessed his fatal performance, it represented not just the loss of a skilled performer but a harsh reminder of the very real risks behind the spectacle and glamour of circus life. Number 1. Evil Knievel. Can mythology and reality exist in the same person? For one man, crashes became as much a part of his legend as his successes, creating an American icon whose very name became synonymous with extreme danger. Robert Craig Knievel, better known to the world as Evil Knievel, wasn't just a motorcycle daredevil. He was a cultural phenomenon who transcended his death-defying jumps to become a living embodiment of American daring and spectacle. Unlike others on this list, Knievel didn't die during a stunt, though not for lack of trying. His body absorbed so much punishment over his career that his later years were marked by constant pain and health complications. Knievel's rise to fame began in the late 1960s when the former insurance salesman decided that jumping motorcycles over increasingly improbable obstacles could be both profitable and thrilling. His formula was simple but effective. Choose an outrageous jump, promote it with flamboyant promises, perform dressed in his signature red, white, and blue leather jumpsuit, and crucially be willing to crash spectacularly. By the mid-1970s, Knievel had become one of the most famous people in America. His failed attempt to jump the Snake River Canyon in a rocket-powered skycycle in 1974 was watched by millions on closed-circuit television. His toy set sales records. His persona, equal parts showman, patriot, and self-destructive daredevil, reflected something essential about American culture during a tumultuous era. What distinguished Neville from many daredevils was his remarkable ability to survive catastrophic crashes. His attempted jump over the fountains at Caesar's Palace in 1967 resulted in a crash that left him in a coma for 29 days with a crushed pelvis and femur, fractures to his hip, wrist, and both ankles, and a concussion. Doctors told him he might never walk again. He was performing jumps within 6 months. Over his career, Neville claimed to have broken 35 bones, though many believe the true number was higher. He spent more than 3 years of his life in hospitals. By his own estimation, he was knocked unconscious 20 times during failed jumps. Yet he kept performing, kept crashing, and kept coming back for more. The psychological profile of Neville presents a fascinating study in contrasts. On one hand, he meticulously calculated the physics of each jump, working with engineers to determine speeds and distances. On the other hand, he often attempted jumps that these same engineers told him were physically impossible. Neville's physical decline began in the late 1970s, as years of injuries took their toll. He developed hepatitis C, likely from blood transfusions after crashes. He underwent a liver transplant in 1999. By the time he died in 2007 at age 69 from pulmonary fibrosis, he had endured multiple surgeries and lived with chronic pain for decades. The tragic irony of Neville's story is that while he survived his countless bone-crushing crashes, his body ultimately paid an enormous price. In his final years, he needed a cane or wheelchair to move and required oxygen. The man who once soared through the air on a motorcycle could barely cross a room. Perhaps the most telling quote from Neville came near the end of his life: "You can be a reckless young man, but you can't be a reckless old man." For a daredevil who survived his stunts only to suffer their consequences for decades afterward, these words carry particular poignancy. What drives humans to push beyond safe boundaries? Is the momentary glory worth the ultimate risk?